today I am going to speed up this tutorial because it was crazy. It was almost an hour. Who wants to watch an hour of me making stuff? So these tools come from polymerclaytv.com. I'm showing you two molds and some plunger cutters. And I've got a piece of MDF board that I got at Hobby Lobby, bundle of plaques, and some punchinella. So I'm going to create a little background with some scrapbooking paper that I always keep around in the studio. So I'm going to start with regular Sculpey clay. It's white and it will pick up the coloring that I'm going to do to it. So I've already molded some letters and I'm just going to show you how I do that. I try to take a small amount that I know is going to fit in the mold, and then I put a little point on the bottom so that I can smush it down into the point at the bottom of the pennant, and then I just use my finger to smush and roll and press into the mold. I don't like to overfill my molds and then cut off the extra. Some people do that, but not me. I try to make it flush and not use my blade so that I can just roll the mold and pop it out. So I'll show you another one just so you can catch what I'm doing here. I have to do the M, so I'm taking a small amount of clay that I'm estimating will fit the mold, smushing it, making the point at the bottom, and pressing it in, filling the mold, and then I use my finger to roll and smush and make sure that it's only filling the mold. And then I'm going to pick up the mold and gently roll that piece out of there. These molds are nice and flexible, so that works really well. Now the other good thing about these is that you can bake directly in the mold. Like if you are having trouble getting the letters out perfectly, you can go ahead and leave your letters in there. So I'm going to do that right here. I'm going to make a couple of letters and leave them in the mold when I bake. Next we're going to do the houses, and I'm going to do the same thing. It's a shallow mold, so I'm just going to mush up some clay that I think will fit and shove it in there and try not to overflow the mold. And these molds have little parts that stick off of them. So I'm going to probably do a little backfilling and making sure that those little protrusions have enough clay to make them strong. So I'm just mushing and pressing the clay to get it out all the way to the edges there. And this clay is nice and soft. Another kind of clay that's soft enough to do this would be Sculpey Soufflé. Cernit is also soft like this and works really well in molds. So you can see I added another little piece there to make that eave of the house stronger and stick out as far as it needed to go. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm going to take little pieces and enrich the clay so that it's thick enough so that when I unmold it, nothing's going to break or crack off. So when you do it from behind, like I'm doing, you don't run the risk of having like cracks showing on the front of your mold. So first I try to fill the mold and then fill in from the back if I need to. Now these little houses are delicate, so I'm going to bake them right in the mold as well. Next, let's make some flowers with the plunger cutters. The big one generally doesn't get stuck inside the cutter. You might want to use a ball stylus tool to indent them and make them sort of cup-shaped when they're large like that. I like to do that. I'm using my Sculpey tool right there. It's got a big ball on the end that makes a nice cup shape. And I'm just laying things onto my tile where it's going to bake. All right, that's the medium cutter. Make a couple of those. And that one did get stuck, so there you go. That's how the plunger cutters work. When the clay gets stuck up inside, which often happens with the smaller cutters, you just pop them out. And these cutters make a little divot in the center of the flower, which I kind of like. But you can also flip them over to the clear side and use them without the divot. So you have two choices with these cutters. Either a little hole divot in the center, or flip them over and use the back. Now this whole tile is going into the oven for 30 minutes at 275. And while that's baking, we're going to make the background. So I'm just going to cut loosely a piece of this background paper that will fit over my piece of MDF. And then I'm going to get my gel medium, which is, I'm using Golden Heavy Matte, and I'm going to use it like a glue. And we like this a lot because it doesn't wrinkle the paper, and it works really well as a quick binding glue. I really like the heavy matte. I don't tend to want my papers to be glossy, so just in case this got somewhere else, you know, I wouldn't want any gloss to show, but really I'm just using it as a glue right now. So I'm just putting it on in a nice thick thing. Throw your brush in some water, line it up on the edges there, press it down, and it's going to dry pretty fast, so I can keep working. So that's Golden Extra Heavy Gel Matte. And I'm going to take my craft sheet out and get my X-Acto blade and just cut off the excess. My blade had a little burr on it, so make sure you're using a fresh blade, otherwise you can rip the paper a little. It's not that big a deal here, but now I'll probably use something on the edges, like my Inca Gold, something like that. And you can do anything you want at this point. I am going to decorate it with some Dilutions ink spray and my little squares. I'm going to give it a couple shots of ink to give a little pattern of bricks in the background, since it is a home themed project. So you take that off, and then just give your punchinella a wipe. You don't ever want to put it away wet or covered with ink or mediums or paint or anything like that, because then you'll gunk it up and you won't be able to continue using it. So I've got my leaves and some Brilliance Dewdrop ink, which is slightly metallic, and I'm just going to pounce some leaves directly with the ink pad, just in the corners around there, you know, just make it springy and make it look a little bit of green in the background. And grab your heat gun, because Brilliance Dewdrops inks are heat set. So you need to quickly shoot that background with some heat so that your ink doesn't get all over the place. Most pigment inks are heat set like this. The spray that I used is a dye base, so that dried instantly. But, you know, just make sure that you're paying attention to what kind of inks you're using. Yay, we are out of the oven, and we're just gonna go ahead and take these pieces and let them cool off. Now it's time to do some antiquing. And when we antique, we'll use a color of paint that's going to go in the background and all the cracks of the piece. And the way you do it is by painting it on with a nice stiff brush so that it gets down into the cracks, and then immediately wiping it off with a soft cloth. And I try to go in the opposite direction of the cracks so that the paint will stay down in there and I'm not wiping it back out. You can use your fingernail, which I'm doing, to kind of scrub it and get as much off as you want. And in fact, if you wanted to later, you could come back with a wet sponge or even like an emery file if you really wanted the high points to be super white, which I don't, so I'm fine with just wiping back the paint with my cloth. But the reason I'm antiquing first is because of the way I'm going to color these. A lot of people antique as a last step, but you'll see when I get to the coloring part, which I'm going to do with something that maybe you haven't seen on polymer clay before. So I wanted everything to have sort of a base color, before I go in and add the actual colors to the pieces. So here I'm just going to go to town on all the little letters of the pennant, making sure that I'm wiping back the high points of the letters, the stitching around the edges, and a little bit of the background where I'm going to add a very subtle bit of color. Now we're all done and we're ready to start coloring. And I'm going to use alcohol markers. I have Spectrum Noir and I'm looking at my background piece there just to make sure that the colors I'm picking are going to go along with it. So I'm going to use, they have two ends. One end is thick and wide and the other end is thin. And just depending on your eye-hand coordination and what you're trying to accomplish, you can use either end. I'm going to end up mostly using the fine tip to get into all the little nooks and crannies. And I'm just gently, lightly coloring with the alcohol marker. It's that easy. And the reason I antiqued first is because now I can be, I don't want to say sloppy, but I don't have to be like perfect because there's no white showing and I can just kind of quickly come in with all my colors and just color it in and make it look cute. And you can layer alcohol markers. You can keep going until they're darker. You can sort of blend them while they're still wet, but they do dry pretty fast. You don't have to do anything special to dry them. So now for the letters, I'm just going to pick some colors that will go well together and do all of the home letters and then the sweet. The two homes are going to be the same and the sweet will be a different, slightly different color. So I want them all to go together and be readable. Some people like to do their letters in different colors, but I really wanted them to be very legible. So you can easily see that it says Home Sweet Home right on the plaque. So I chose two different colors that go together, a sort of darker purpley red and the pinky red for the Home Sweet Home. All of my edges are going to get this sort of teal dark color for the stitching. So all of them will have that color. And then I'm going to take other lighter colors and go over the interiors there to make the banners different colors. Now the flowers I did not antique because I want them to be bright and stand out from the background. So I'm just going to go ahead and color them with the coordinating colors, and they'll be nice and bright. You can use other brands of alcohol markers too. Just make sure that they're alcohol and not pigment, because the alcohol looks really good, but the pigment will cover all of your details and be very thick and opaque. Now that all the pieces are colored, we're going to use some ribbon by the Paper Studio, which was $3.99, but I got it on sale for 50% off because Hobby Lobby always has sales. So I picked out a couple of colors that I think will go well, some narrow ones. I've got my hot glue gun, and I'm just going to cut them so that they will fit and make like a little swag. And I'm just going to hot glue them from the back around to the front, exactly where I want them, so that they sort of dip in the middle, so that it looks like the little pennants are hanging down. Careful, don't burn yourself. And later on, you might want to finish the back of the board with a piece of paper or fabric or something like that. Space out your little pennants before you glue your bunting down, because you could mess up your placement and then you wouldn't be happy with it. So always look first and glue second. You know, they say measure twice, cut once. Well, check your placement, then add the glue. Once you get started, it's decision-making time. I decided not to use all 3 houses that I made, and I'll save the other little house for another project. So I'm going to glue this one down and then get my next pennant going and just glue all my letters and things on. You know, you just want to make sure before you start gluing things, and I can't reiterate that enough, that everything's going to fit the way you want it to. So I wasn't sure when I started if I would use all 3 houses, and now I know that I'm not going to. Next, we'll do the flowers, and I'm just going to scatter them around and use my hot glue and just put them around the design so that the colors are represented all over the design. That's called balance, and when you learn to balance things out with your colors, then your artwork will really start looking nice. So just scatter your flowers around. Don't worry too much, but don't put all the yellow ones in one spot and all the blue ones in another spot. Use your common sense and scatter them around the design. Now that the flowers are on, we're going to deal with hanging the back. So I picked this wide piece of lace because I figure a nail can fit through there pretty easily. So pay attention, find a spot along your lace that is nice and flat, and just cut off a piece, and I'm going to go ahead and hot glue gun it to itself and then to the back, just creating a little tab at the top. So a little glue to glue the lace together, and then a big glob of glue to glue it onto the back for hanging. And since it's on my temperature and stick-free crafting sheet, I'll leave it there and pull it off later once it's all dry and hard. Next, we're going to embellish, and I love Martha Stewart glass paint glitter for embellishing my polymer clay. It might seem like a strange product that you would use for this, but I really love it because the colors are intense, but they're still translucent, and the paint really flattens down and becomes just the glitter when it's dry. So you don't have to worry about it being like all puffy and shiny. You're just going to see the very fine glitter when it's dried up and ready to hang. So I'm using copper and Florentine gold. Those are the two colors. And I like to squeeze a little bit out onto the lids of my paint jars so that I can see how they're going to dry. So that's a little tip for you. Woo, I am almost done, and I'm so glad that you stuck with me through this whole tutorial. I didn't realize it was going to be so long, but I had a vision and I went with it. I'm just outlining the big flowers, and I hope that you will join us at Polymer Clay TV, which is our blog, Polymer Clay Adventure, which is the online retreat for polymer clay, and you can find many of the tools that I used at polymerclaytv.com. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next week.